Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and to the entire CGI team for having me today. I'm so glad that we have such an intimate room together, so please feel free to lean in. And if anything you hear today resonates with you, share some snaps. I want this to be a conversation for all of us. And since we're here at Story Studio, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a story. I will never forget where I was sitting in my 7th grade history classroom in Wichita, Kansas, on the day we started learning about the Holocaust. That was already a pretty intense unit to be learning as a 7th grader, let alone it became more complicated by the elephant in the room. I was the only Jewish student in my grade, and at the time, in my entire middle school. And every time our teacher would mention anything remotely Jewish, all of my classmates would physically turn their heads to stare at me. And I can still remember how that felt in the moment. I just wanted to curl up into a ball and make myself invisible. Because in that moment, I felt so misunderstood and ashamed of who I was. But what kept me going was the dream of the day that I would leave the Midwest behind for college and find my people. So when that day arrived, I guess you could say I sprinted down the yellow brick road all the way to the East Coast for school. And before the end of my first year, I surrounded myself with all Jewish students. I did what my younger self so wanted, and I joined every Jewish club under the sun. I also even found myself a Jewish boyfriend. My parents were so happy. And one day, as I was walking through campus, something hit me. Every single person who I had met in a classroom or at the dining hall was gathered in groups of people who were like them. I couldn't believe it. My peers were doing the exact same thing as I was, but with their respective identity groups. And for the first time, I thought to myself that maybe I had it all wrong. Maybe I was actually taking for granted my entire upbringing in Kansas when I was surrounded with people who were different than me, because I thought surrounding myself with people who were like me was the key to belonging, when in fact it was very far from that. In that moment, I thought to myself, I actually know so much more about myself, my beliefs, and the world around me through the exploration of others. And staying inside of a bubble of people who shared my same background was comfortable, but it wasn't belonging. And I like to think back to what my younger self so badly needed sitting in that classroom, and what I needed was a voice. Because you see, what I couldn't realize at the time was that my classmates simply didn't understand who I was. Every single person has different experiences, identities, and perspectives by which they see the world. And the more and more we continue to build up the walls of our echo chambers and let ignorance be the reason for why we keep one another at arm's length, we're only going to deepen that divide and multiply that misunderstanding. And the reason I couldn't understand that at the time was because I simply didn't know how to have the conversation. This was the moment when I found my voice. When I realized that what made me different was the key to belonging, I knew I could help others realize this too. And in that moment, I realized that I actually want to spend my time on this earth bringing the world back together. And the key to unifying the world just takes us opening up our echo chambers and having conversations with people from all walks of life. Because when we do that, we can learn to coexist, not void of our differences, but because of them. Did you know that 21% of white Americans have never interacted with someone of a different race or ethnicity? Or that 70% of Americans have never met someone who's trans? And as a Kansan, I find this stat in particular stark and interesting, that 33% of young Americans have actually never seen a cow in real life. I know. And if anything, I think these statistics prove to show us that we don't know each other very well. And if we actually take the time to bring us a little bit closer to one another and understand who each other is for the unique experiences, identities, and backgrounds that brought them to that time in existence, we would be able to bring the world back together. And I think the solution is having conversations where we don't try to change one another's minds or bring them over to our side, but have conversations with the intention of listening and understanding one another. This is what inspired me to pass the mic to Gen Z and start my platform, The Conversationalist. We're a nonpartisan educational platform passing the mic to Gen Z and opening up these echo chamber breaking conversations, because when we have those conversations, we're able to bring the world back together where we can sit at the same table. I'm Sophie Beren, and I'm honored to be your host for Story Studio today. And I hope that by the end of our session, each of us sitting in this room can feel empowered to do our part to bring our country back together. Because you see, unifying doesn't happen overnight, but it's actually much simpler than you think. Because when we can stand firmly in who we are, while simultaneously, opening up ourselves and our minds to the lived experiences of others, we can actually uncover common ground in very unlikely places. And at the end of the day, that can only happen with a single conversation.